Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we're going to talk about recent changes that have come to Mythic Plus in patch 10.1, and also an announcement about patch 10.1.5 that lines up with what I was expecting would happen, but has been confirmed, and so will be relevant for how we play over the next couple of weeks and into the new patch. So, 10.1 Mythic Plus tuning hotfixes. These are all already live and have been now, even as the time I'm recording this for like a day. A little slow to record this video and get it out. Sorry about that. But they're a bunch of nerfs to a bunch of different dungeons. There is one, like, exploit basically that got removed, which is Immature Venom Sac. This was an item you could farm out of Blackrock Spire that would last for 1 hour and let you cleanse a disease or a poison from yourself, and you would use it on Neuraxis to make that fight much easier. Still very hard fight, but make it easier, make it more doable. That has been designed, has been changed to no longer work in Mythic Plus dungeons or raids, which is fair. Brackenhide Hollow. Gash Tooth's periodic damage on Gash Frenzy has been reduced by 25%. Now, the upfront damage is still very, very hurty. So my biggest advice for Gash Frenzy is as soon as you see this timer about to fire, or as soon as the Gash Frenzy starts casting, if you're not looking at your timer, hit a defensive hidden immunity before it hits you the first time, and that will make your life a lot easier. If you can expose the initial damage to a damage reduction, that is by far the best thing you can do, because this bleed goes away when you're over 90% health. The bleed itself is very nasty, and that's been reduced, but it's still got that huge upfront damage that the less that is, the faster you'll be over 90%. Health pot, health stone your way out of it as well can be really big, especially on fortified or lower keys where you're only going to get 1 or 2 Gash Frenzies. Don't be afraid to like empty the bag to get through it. Decatriarch Wrath Eye. The damage of Withered Eruption has been reduced by 10%. And then the Rotburst totems cast over 7 instead of 5 seconds. And they actually have a little bit of a ramp-up time that I believe is unchanged before they start casting. So you're going to get 2 more total seconds per totem, which that's going to help in a lot of the cases that they ended up going off. A lot of the times that the Rotburst totems exploded, it was really close, and now they're not going to anymore. I still would have preferred that this fight and other fights like it, like the last boss of Vortex Pinnacle, that spawn a bunch of ads, did so at a reduced frequency, or did so in a way that scaled less nastily with key level. So health on those totems, perhaps being capped at the plus 20 health value, something like that, or the plus 15 health value, something like that, where it's just a little bit less. Those fights end up really feeling like a slog as you get to the high key levels, because you just have to have all of your cooldowns put into these totems and these novas and stuff. But this does help a lot. I mean, this is an extra global or 2 into these totems, which in a lot of cases is going to make the difference. Halls of Infusion. The first boss is the only one to see changes here, which is surprising to me, because Halls of Infusion, the list of things I would have changed in this dungeon is trash at the start of the dungeon, trash in the middle of the dungeon, trash at the end of the dungeon, like the last couple bosses. But they targeted the first boss here. Power Overload is now only going to target 2, down from 3, and the dot damage has been reduced by 33% as well. So the old strategy when it targeted 3 people was very much to just like stack up and then either mass dispel or wait for it to expire and then run as kind of a team, so you could stay in range of your healer, even out of the big circle. Now that it only targets 2 people, I think there might be more of a kind of spread, insta dispel 1, and then let the other expire, and that won't fill up your whole room like having 3 people spread would have in the later part of the fight. I'm not 100% sure on this. I haven't seen any high Halls of Infusion since this change, but it does seem like a good thing to target. It's just there's a bunch of other stuff in Halls of Infusion that I think also should be on here. Neltharus has the biggest set of nerfs in these changes. There's health reductions on many of the mobs, and on all the bosses except for Chargath, Bane of Scales, which is not getting nerfed. And there's also damage reduction on most of the dangerous abilities of these different bosses, including 4 different abilities on Magma Tusk are getting less nasty. I guess only 3 of them are damage reductions, and one of them is a frequency reduction. That's the Magma Lob that doesn't do any damage anyways because you're dodging it. But I think this is a good set of changes. I think Neltharus, I would have really liked to see them go in and remove the chain strategy in some way. So something like massively reducing the damage that the chains do to the mobs, making that not scale with M plus level, or making it so that each chain can only be used one total time rather than being used multiple times. Something like that, accompanied with perhaps even more nerfs to the trash, because this dungeon is now very much about the chains. And to me, dungeons like that, like Toldegor being about the cannons, Siege of Borealis being about the spotter circles, Plaguefall being about the plague borers, Necrotic Wake being about the Necrotic Wake weapons. To me, those dungeons were hurt by that being the way that you did them. And Neltharus is a similar sort of thing. This makes it a lot less bad to just like pug the dungeon, do the bosses just doing them up front, which of course you can't use change on bosses, right? But doing the bosses got a lot better. But the trash also got quite a lot of nerfs here to the health, not to the damage though. So I don't know, I mean, this was a good dungeon to target with these changes for the quality of life of pugging, but yeah, I think this is going to be an annoying chain captured dungeon in the key pushing world, which is a shame, I think. Neltharus. So the crawler's acid splatter damage no longer scales with M plus level. Rockmora's crystalline ground damage and the Blight Shard Skitter's health have both been reduced by 25%. So Rockmora's gotten a lot easier here, a lot less likely to die from a tick of crystalline ground after a shatter or something. And also, you're a lot less likely to get a big shatter or need to commit as much to the Skitters because their health has been massively reduced. Neuraxis has had its Toxic Wretch damage reduced by 25%. This fight still does a ton of damage, a ton of throw rock damage on this fight as well, so still a extremely scary fight, but a good nerf here. For groups that were using the Immature Venom Sac, that fight is probably going to be as hard or harder than it was before these changes, so maybe another boss that I think the throw rocks would be a good thing to target on that fight as well. I think the Pelters in Neltharus also could use a little bit of a tone down. Uldaman. So the dot damage of Earthen Shards has been reduced by 20%. I like this. Earthen Shards, especially in high key for Uldaman, is very much about big defensives, immunities, Evoker Bleed Dispel, dwarfing it, bopping it, those sorts of things. And those buttons existing as counterplay, especially against the hard overlaps, I think is good. But them being required or very important to stack or very valuable to stack is something that I don't like as much. So I think making that a little bit less important is good. While still, I mean, this ability is still extremely scary. Emberon, there is a visual update to the Seeking Flames. They now have a vertical tornado above them. Very nice. These were pretty hard to see, and because of the way that the room's floor was colored, it was often kind of hard, especially to get an idea of if it was close to you or far away from you, because the perspective was sometimes confusing. Underrot's taken a nerf here. The Dark Echo's cast time on the worms has been has been increased by an extra half second. So a little bit less likely for that first tick to go off, which was something that did usually happen if you didn't have somebody looking and knowing that Dark Echoes was about to cast, ready to hit their kick. And then finally, the Skyfall Nova damage on Assad has been reduced. So not health or frequency, but damage reduction is certainly still nice there as well. So these are the changes that have landed on Mythic Plus after, as the post says here, a hiatus, during which there was not much change to Mythic Plus. I think that this is a lot of good changes. Mythic Plus this season had a big disparity between the hard bits and the easy bits of the dungeons. And so sometimes there's this confusion. I see these comments about, why do high-end players always want to see nerfs, which don't always want to see nerfs, but when it comes to Mythic Plus, you're playing an infinitely scaling game mode, and so when the hard parts of the dungeon are 4 times harder than the easy parts of the dungeon, it doesn't actually change how hard the content we're doing is, because we're still going to just push the key level up to the part where the hard bits are really, really hard and are, at the edge of our abilities. But then that means that the rest of the dungeon is way below that, right? And so we're just doing this dungeon. You could see this in dungeons like King's Rest with Shadow of Zool, or the bosses, depending on if it was Tyrannical or Fortified. And a lot of the dungeons this season had that vibe as well, where it's like, most of the dungeons chill, one boss or 2 bosses, or all the bosses in the case of some of these dungeons, are just sitting there like, super Godzilla monsters. And so by nerfing the bosses, Then we get to do these dungeons at a key level. I mean, we'll raise the key level if we can, and that increases the average difficulty of the experience, which is fun. It's fun to have the dungeon be, obviously you want some hard bits and some easy bits, but when the disparity is as big as some of these things were, that's why I personally was really in favor of seeing a lot of these things cut down a little bit. Again, this is still going to be, I believe, one of the most difficult seasons in terms of like how hard the hard bits are and the hard bosses are compared to the others. But I think there's a lot of moves in a good direction. There are a couple of other things I still hope to see changed, but hopefully this isn't just the last tuning changes to M+, but a return to the weekly cadence of seeing anything that needs to get nerfed getting nerfed, hopefully. There is also the update on the myth track, which is something that people talk about in my stream a lot, so I figured I'd add that into this video. Maybe I should have made another video for it, but, you know, it's happening here, so that's what you're getting. Which is that, so this is a confirmation about how it's going to work on PTR. Gear created at item level 441 or 444 can now be upgraded using the new myth track upgrade system. Instead of being above the upgrade system entirely, it goes from 441 to 444 to 447, and this change is retroactive for all gear obtained in Season 2. Any Season 2 gear that was created at eye level 441, 444, or 447 will now display its upgrade level along the myth track and can be upgraded at any eye level vendor, item upgrade vendor. This requires flight stones and an aspect crest for each upgrade. The usual discount rules apply, the same as what you've been used to, which is account-wide flight stone reductions and character-specific crest reductions. So this affects Mythic Raid, the first few bosses, very rare loot from the last 2 bosses of the Heroic Raid, and the Great Vault. Any gear that comes from the 16 to 20, but actually 16 to 19 is where it matters because 20 is already 447. But 16 to 19 really range is going to be on this myth track and be upgradable. So what does this mean? Well, I mean, if you read it, make sure you read this carefully because I've gotten a lot of questions about like if this means hero track gear is changing at all. No gear that you have that already is on the hero track, unless it's like if it dropped at 441, maybe it said hero 5 out of 5 on it. But I don't think there was any gear that actually did that. I think it just would say 441 and not be on a track. But no gear that says hero on it right now is going to change at all. No gear that drops at hero right now is going to change at all. Nothing from the heroic raid except for those very rare items. But if you are sitting on gear from these first few bosses of Mythic or Great Vault gear at 16 to 19, right? You did some 16s the first week. You've got a 441 piece of gear. That will retroactively become upgradable. And that means that now you could be this week, next week, farming at the 16 key level, the 17 key level instead of the 20 key level. And really the 17 key level is, so there's benefits and downsides to each of the different key levels. The benefit of doing things at plus 20 level, if you can, is that the gear won't cost you any crests or flight stones to upgrade if you get it out of your weekly vault. And also you're dropping 431 end of dungeon. So if you still need 431, if you still need upgrades of end of dungeon stuff, that will be cheaper to upgrade as well. The benefits of doing 19s and 18s are pretty weak compared to 17s. There are incremental upgrades of a few item levels on the Great Vault and end of dungeon loot alternating at each key level. But 17s are the point, that's the lowest key where you can get hero track gear at the end of the dungeon. So if there's something from the dungeon that would be an upgrade for you on the hero track, especially, if there's just something that would be an upgrade if it dropped with a tertiary, that can be a good level to farm, and it's a lot easier than 20s, which means you're a lot more likely to time the key, which means you're a lot more likely to get more crests. Obviously, you're going to have to spend some of those extra crests that you get on upgrading the gear when you can out of your vault. So that's a downside of doing the 17s. 16s also drop aspect crest, and they also will give you myth track gear, 441 gear in your Great Vault, right? The Great Vault gear will still be on the myth track when 7.1.5 comes out. So 16s are also a good key level to farm. The downside of the 16s relative to the 17s is that they will drop champion track gear at the end of the dungeon, which can only be upgraded to 437. So if there is something you might use from a certain dungeon, especially if there's something that you would use if it dropped with a socket or with a tertiary, then the 16s are slightly worse than the 17s because you won't be able to get that at hero track level. But if you don't have anything that you need from the dungeons, which there's a lot of characters for whom that's something that you're past worrying about is end of dungeon gear, then 16s are the fastest farm for aspect crests and for myth track Great Vault gear. So that's the current key level meta right now. I've been doing a lot of 17s and a couple 16s as well. I've still done a couple 20s. It's nice to do. I think for me, like on the characters that I care about and play a lot, I'm going to try and do like 120, 3 17s, something like that. And that way I can get my extra Great Vault tracks filled. But just doing that 120 means that I'll be able to have a chance of high rolling and having the gear that I take out of my vault come in that slot and save myself some crests. And I can do that 120 in a pretty nice and easy key like Freehold or Underrot. And then when we go down to the 17 level, that can be just, the harder keys, right? The ones that are a little bit less likely to be timed at the 20 level with some rats in the key, which when I'm in a key, there's always at least one. So that's the changes that have come to Mythic Plus. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. I do hope that this is understandable what's happening here, because I've definitely gotten a lot of questions about this as well. So maybe reread this carefully, but ask in the comments below as well, and I'll try and answer any specific questions you have about how it's going to work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.